Hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good night, maybe, depending on where you are. Gareth here. We are just waiting on Daniel arriving so we can get started as well. Of course, as we like to say around here, it wouldn't be live if something didn't go wrong. So, technical difficulties, please stand by. I can already see some comments here from everybody who's coming in. Hello, good to see our usuals. Salissa, Mick, Lori. Mick, yeah, reminds me of a Japanese horror movie. Yes, very much so. This book. So, not to spoil anything because it's in the title anyway, but today we are going to take a Halloween look at Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. Nice little Halloween horror choice. Speaking of Halloween horror, please forgive if my voice sounds off. I'm suffering a bit of a cold, so I'm probably going to sound like a zombie myself throughout all of this. But sound off in the chat if you can hear me there and it's all going out live correctly. How's everybody doing? And if I can just check that we actually have the AutoCrit screen streaming correctly as well. Let me know. Cool. Okay. Well, yes, this particular story is, as per usual, for something brand new. This is a brand new novella that's only come out at the end of last week, I believe. It is, of course, a pretty hard horror story, and I haven't finished my copy just yet. So, as usual, we'll avoid spoilers as much as possible. I will say too, though, as well, a little bit of fair warning. There's some what I like to call salty language, kind of coming up here that you'll see. Quite inescapable, quite funny as well when you see some of the reports we have coming up. The story itself, as I'm making my way through it, is very good. Definitely a recommend so far, even though I haven't gotten to the end. The story, Cassandra, there's kind of an own voices element to it because it is set in a old Japanese mansion where our main characters have all gone to investigate the rumors of this bride who died there, and of course her ghost shows up, sporting a very distinct mouthful of blackened teeth as she hunts them down. Daniel has just arrived, so I'll add him to the stream.
Hello.
Hello.
Thankfully I'm not arriving with a whole host of blackened teeth, so not to disappoint anybody, but
I think if we jump right into it, quite an interesting thing for this one as well is I was looking at new releases. This was a top 100. I think it might have been top 20 release in ghost fiction, ghost horror on Amazon. And there was, I jumped at this one because it's also a novella. And most of the time when we're doing What's the Score, we're looking at novels. We're going full length. You can see it's kind of a little, let me scroll down slightly on the screen here so everybody can see it. But about around 22,000 words is the length of this one. And we're usually looking at things that are a fair bit longer than that. So I thought it would be interesting to actually look at something smaller and see how the system works there in terms of responding to different elements. Based on, we'll do our usual little kickoff here before we dig into each of the reports, but I think based on the numbers here that we can see, of course, sometimes we can see actual novels having similar numbers of, especially repetition, similar numbers of indicators showing up. But do we have any guesses on the initial summary score? We will do a general fiction and also a horror score at the end.
That's tough. Let's see what everybody says here. I don't even know if I want to hazard a guess on this one. It's kind of
I'll drop a little hint.
Different word like
it isn't scary. It's not a scary score.
Yeah, I would guess. I'm just gonna say 77. Everyone's like 75.6, 75, 80.6, 83.5. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
About an 8-point range there, but optimistic.
Yeah. I think this 70s, well, around the 70s, I was going to say feels a little conservative, but some of the horror scores that we've looked at in the past, it's never really been genre-wise a huge scorer in general terms,
Right.
which makes this one a little bit of a standout to be quite frank, because it's
Whoa!
86.54 right off the bat.
Wow. It sounds like a tightly written, perhaps.
Yeah, there's something particularly impressive in this novella that we'll point out very, very quickly, because everybody knows where I like to start with these things. It's dialogue. So we're going to look at some dialogue first of all.
All right.
Dialogue tags. And I warned about the salty language literally in the first line.
At least it establishes that tone early on, which is a smart thing to do with readers rather than you get 2/3 in and you start pulling out that sort of stuff. So it's like it's
It
either
is.
for you or it's not.
Right away, you know where you are.
Yep.
One thing that I feel is worth pointing out as well in the dedication for this novella, the first line of the dedication that Cassandra gives is to legendary editor Ellen Datlow for encouraging her to go ahead with the story and actually get it done.
Awesome.
Giving us some props to begin with, and I think that kind of help again would go into something like this, saying, "Yeah, it's fine to open with that." You just kind of set the tone. If we get into dialogue tags in our summary, well, yeah, Cassandra definitely sticks to the kind of advice here. Keep it mostly said and asked.
Yep.
Tweak it up only when you need to. So throughout the whole thing, there's only 36 uses of alternatives, and they're kind of normal ones, if you know what I mean. Whispered, repeated, hissed, demanded. They are overused. Began, continued, but there's nothing. I think probably the craziest of all that I would pick out of any of these would be drawled or intoned, maybe. But there's nothing really, pushing the boat out and being a little too much here.
No.
It's worth pointing out that whenever Cassandra, and this is what I really, really like about the writing here instead of the dialogue, when she's not using an actual tag, they will go for immediate action. So here, that's Talia walked, and then here Paul speaks. We'll be fine. Philip pounded his sternum with a fist. This happens throughout the vast majority of dialogue in this novella, and there is quite a lot of dialogue. This is a group of I think 4 main characters, and they are constantly bouncing off of each other. There's a lot of tension, a lot of conflict, because they have histories, and okay, yes, they're friends, but there's a lot lurking under the surface. This is a horror story after all, and all of that's going to kind of explode. But what's happening is, for example, here, really smart writing will do this, where the line of dialogue happens and then I swallowed. There's a bit of an action. That action following on from that dialogue sets a tone, sets a context for the dialogue, tells us how the character is feeling. And that's just brilliant.
Yeah, and honestly, it speaks to why sometimes writers will want to avoid the set and ask just because they're like, well, it's kind of whatever. It's like it's a waste. I really want to give more detail. But instead of reaching for another verb, which is just another way of talking about how somebody talks, reach to actions, because then you're really showing emotional state, right? Because you can say, they shouted or whatever, or you can show their anger, and that might be a better thing to do in that situation.
Yeah, and this also being a first-person narrative, we're kind of anchored within the mind of the narrator too. So something like this is also really good, where the character will say, it's not that. Then so much sincerity in those gold blue eyes. It's like we're looking into them. And again, you could, if you wanted to, it could just say, it's not that, he said sincerely. And use attach something to dialogue. We'll get to the adverbs in just a moment, but again, Cassandra very wisely and throughout the novella chooses not to do that. It's a lot more involving. So really, really good.
Yeah, especially in the first person when you have somebody say, so much sincerity, but it just really feels like somebody telling you a story, whereas the other feels more distant.
Yeah, true. Speaking of adverbs and dialogue, here's where we are.
Wow.
4 in total.
She's a Stephen Kingite, right, about her hatred of adverbs.
Quite probably. That's 3%.
Somebody read on writing.
3% of all dialogue, and we're
Wow.
again only using softly, casually, stiffly, hoarsely. Again, common adverbs that you might see in most things, and especially horror, I suppose. I guess, especially hoarsely and softly,
Yeah.
are going to be used for effect.
And all
But
of those are rather not necessary. I mean, you could do it a different way, but they're not just floating there, right? Because stiffly is a type of a way of saying it, and you might not get that, especially in that sentence, right? I don't need your pity. You can say that in so many different ways that it does add that clarification.
yeah, true. That is true. Yeah, something that I don't need your pity. I said stiffly. That could be combined into one line, but again, I think the stiffly's probably there for rhythm as well,
Hmm.
inside the writing. So that kind of thing, you could look at yourself and think, I don't really. Okay, well, it's telling me. Well, number one, it's not. There's nothing being overused here, so you've got none of that pesky red, red highlighting. But you
Nope.
might think to yourself, if you would rather not use an adverb, but sometimes, it does help with measure. You want to put a little bit of a break
Mm,
in the middle there, add an extra bounce to it rather than just stopping it said.
hmm. Yep. Hoarsely would be very difficult to get across without a lot of additional words.
That is true, yeah. And when we come to adverbs,
Very few.
very few. It's a really, really good result again. We're breaking up into the great area.
No worries, Bob. I would have thought the same thing. So he thought that perhaps none of the adverb uses would be for the main character, the point of view, but no, she did. But it was worth a shot.
So we have here probably. Actually, you can see none of these in between are being logged, by the system as overused in
No.
a general fiction sense. But maybe that's something for horror here as well. 6666666. But actually, barely anyway. Exactly, nearly, seriously, absolutely, literally, badly. Are the only ones coming up here. So still a decent amount, but very few removals. Again, part of that, I guess, is going to be a side effect of the lower word count. And you'll also notice one thing that I mentioned before was that the novella's quite heavy on dialogue. The
Hmm.
characters are talking back and forth a lot. And the majority of these, as you're going through, for example, let's take a look at all, 4 instances of seriously. So you have seriously, though, it's no big deal, is within dialogue. Seriously, like, oh my God, is it within dialogue?
Mm-hmm.
This is within
Seriously.
dialogue.
Yeah.
And this is within
Yeah.
dialogue.
Makes
Dude,
sense.
seriously,
Yeah.
the vast majority of them are held within dialogue, and there's, if it sounds natural, there's not a lot you can do about that. So call it a day. It looks,
Yep.
even just getting
And
this far into reports.
there's that
Sorry, go.
hoarsely. It's right above it. And yeah, in the
Oh,
context
did
of
you
that
get
sentence,
it?
to get to that without saying that word would have taken a lot of words. So
Yeah, true. So yeah, it looks like something just this few reports in that has been given a lot of love, I think,
yeah.
in terms of the editing. But does that also carry across to filler words? Everybody's, I guess, second favorite thing to look at. And yeah, frankly, filler words can be tough to get, below average or kind of better than average,
Hmm.
simply because their use, sometimes we need them.
Especially dialogue.
Especially dialogue. And when we're talking about something that is dialogue heavy, now I suspect we'll probably see the same thing that we did there with the adverbs.
Especially
If
the
we have
justs.
just, even, that's, and that'd. Now that'd, I assume, is going to be narrative, because that's probably past tense narration. Uh,
Hmm.
correct. So that's popping up, but that's, and especially just, where that's our biggest one here. It's 22 out of 71. So I suspect that's going to be dialogue.
Yep. Two right there in dialogue. Yeah.
Two right away. It's not a palace, it's just a mansion. I didn't rent the building per se, just got us permits to
Hmm.
spend a few nights here. Talk about a horror setup. There it is in that line right there.
Really is, yeah. It just goes to show that some of the tropes, there's still gold to be found. For sure.
And there's one there that isn't in dialogue, but you could just about smell the cream. Just about is a term.
Yeah. Just in total
More
fashion. Yeah.
dialogue.
Yeah. The one thing
And again,
too is
just
when you're
about.
in first person, it does tend to have a more direct narrator approach, so it does tend to take on those same sort of attributes in the prose itself. So.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, because the narration itself is almost dialogue from the narrator in a first person sense. They're telling you the story,
Hmm.
almost like they're sitting opposite, talking to you and recounting what happened. So yeah, you're quite right. There's going to be some more of that to be expected um, than you would find in a third person narrative.
Hmm.
But I think it's actually just a great result, a really great
Hmm.
result. Even
Yeah.
38.7, that's kind of gets hit a bit hard here. But again, most of those, I think are going to be in dialogue.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's all over in dialogue. Not going to jump too far ahead because again, I don't want to spoil things, especially for myself. And our initial pronoun and names use. If anybody here is a regular watching this edition of What's the Score, I'm going to do another open guess here and let people think.
Ooh.
What percentage do
First
we think starts
person.
with first person initial pronoun or names? Little hint: first person because of the use of I becoming kind of more often necessary tends to be a little higher than we would generally see. So I'll give that hint.
Yeah, I'm wondering with how conversational this is if it's not a fair amount. Hmm. Let's see here. 57, 51. I was thinking in the 50s as well, if not, 37, 62. So quite a range there. 37 to 62% so far.
Ooh, 62 feels heavy, but they're not actually bad guesses there. 50.13.
Woohoo!
So we're pretty much on 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't tend to see things go too far above 50 if they do. It's usually somewhere between 30 and 50, 35 and 50. But certainly a lot of first person narratives will push up against that 50, if not a little over. Because using I, more often,
Hmm.
with sentences, and it can become a bit of a curse if you try to remove too many of that. In a first person narrative, it can become really stunted. So sometimes you just gotta, you know, suck it up and go with it. Something like this, you can see here, a lot of I. It just happens. Sometimes it has to happen.
Hmm.
Similarly, we have our sentence starters percentage as well. The number of sentences that are beginning with a conjunction or an ing verb, of course, and that's 7.12% in this one, which I believe is maybe a little lower than what we've seen recently. But I could be wrong on that one. Need to look at the comparative data for that.
Yeah, it does seem a little low.
And generic descriptions. Is Cassandra writing generically, not really giving us a picture of things? Now we're falling on average.
Hmm.
One thing
Which
that I always like
again,
to say,
considering it's so conversational, is actually really good because people naturally don't tend to get too specific. So.
exactly right, and comparing to general fiction, kind of all data across the board falling on the average point, it's not actually a really bad place to be.
Mm-mm.
Sometimes that's a marker of you're where you need to be. And we have here overwhelmingly the most is just the word look.
Hmm.
There's low, wide, and clever. Everything else that could be considered generic, something like great, big, nice. Um, None of those are showing as overused, so technically wouldn't, quote unquote, technically, could be ignored. However, what really stands out is 30 uses of the word look with 8 to go. So the total number of words recommended for removal here is only 11.
Yeah.
That's not massive. Um,
No.
Throughout an entire 20 21,000 22,000 word manuscript. However, again, the word look can be a tough
Dialogue.
one because people say it.
That's one of them.
And on here, for example, you need to look for ghosts. So of course, that's fine.
Yeah. Right. And this is basically dialogue because
It
this is a
might as
gesture
well
that
be
said
dialogue.
look. Yeah. There's more dialogue.
And there's, cocked a worried look. Okay, that may be a little generic. You could think of that as potentially being a little too generic. Is there something more about the expression that you could say that would allow me to infer a worried look? Or do we just need to say it was a worried look and get past this? Come on.
Mm-hmm. Right. This is where you don't necessarily need the software to bully you.
Yes. It may be that perhaps this would be best tweaked slightly just to avoid that repetition. We got look there. You don't look like you're finding the look on my face. So,
Yeah.
but I think this paragraph in the middle, again, you need to be reading through it in its entirety to kind of understand the cadence and the rhythm of it. I think this paragraph probably erases, kind of buries this in the mind enough that getting to the third look here doesn't feel repetitious. And again, more in dialogue. So yeah, I won't dig into all 30 of them, but you can kind of see the flow here. It looks again like a spot where a lot of effort has been put into the editing, and just to make sure it's tight without being overly, cut to ribbons. Let's just say. This is always the good game. I'm not going to show the graph just yet, so I'll ask, what do we think are going to be the top? Let's go with 3 power words.
Ooh, power words. Okay. Well, considering the topic, we have a few different options. I would say fear and encouragement, I would expect. But then the question with the third one is there's like forbidden or maybe greed because I'm not sure what they're getting at. I'm seeing a couple of greed words right there off the get go. I don't know if that's a sign of a theme to the thing, but I'm going to say it is. I'm going to say fear, encouragement, and greed. Those are my guesses.
Fear, encouragement, and greed. Yeah, I think you're starting to learn too much about the power words combination. It's like, yeah, it's going to be primarily what the genre is, probably followed by encouragement to move the story forward, and then something referencing subtext. And yeah, it's you're not far off here.
Yay. Yeah, lust was the other one I was wondering about because there's often that component to horror stories as well. So
Yeah, so we definitely, obviously, have the lion's share here of fear. It's a horror novel,
mhm,
after all. Encouragement, of course, is usually trailing in second in just about any story because those are the energetic words that are literally pulling us through the story.
mhm.
And back then, it was pretty much level pegging with lust and greed. I was quite surprised because the what was the cover quote for the novella is something like, brutally horrific or brutally brilliant, and I thought, well, whenever you reply something is taken as brutal, you'll usually have a lot of anger words
Yeah, I
built
was
into
wondering
that.
about that. It's pretty high. You'll notice safety is incredibly low, which is not a shock.
Yeah, I think that probably speaks to, again, it being a proper, well, quote
Brutal.
unquote, proper brutal horror.
Yeah.
There's not an element of safety really for the characters here, but surprised to see anger falling as low in the face of lust and greed. But perhaps those are, yeah, built more into the story. And of course, as you saw there from the very beginning, there is an element of one of the characters being, the rich kid, and
Hmm.
maybe that ties into what's going on in the backstory with the ghost, the haunting.
Hmm.
And it was quite interesting to look at some of the repetition because, as we know, repetition can be a killer, and it's much easier to look at in something that's shorter than a full novel. And I was looking at repeated phrases to see what might stand out here. And of course, with AutoCrit, if we start from the very beginning of the story, we can find from the beginning to the end anything that gets repeated quite close to one another. So, of course, there Fies is not an issue. Was trying. Something there potentially could be a little issue if
Hmm.
you want to vary that up a bit. That wasn't what I was trying to say. Arms spread, body language open as a house with no doors. You couldn't hit Philip for long, but Fies was trying. Now maybe, yeah, you could think of a different way to say that, but I'm not so sure it's that bad. And friendship, but a friendship nonetheless. That's repetition for definite effect.
Right. Definition and going back to the original concept.
And there's some kind of repetition of shoulders here, just in the way that the physical movement of the characters is being described. Again, it's a very small thing. I probably wouldn't even have noticed it unless I was using something like AutoCrit here to highlight that for me. Certainly, reading it, I didn't notice that people were using
It's just
shoulders a lot.
not an unusual enough noun to really draw attention to itself.
Yeah, I think so. There's some dialogue repetition here. Again, nothing hugely standing out throughout all of this. But one thing that's really, really handy to look at is even if kind of scrolling through the repeated phrases themselves is becoming a bit of a slog, head on over to the phrase frequency, because you'll be able to find those actual phrases that are repeated quite a lot. We got 2 words, 3 words, 4 words. I think we can go into 5 words if there are any, but there are none that are repeated in this novella. And I just laughed. Sorry for the toilet humor, but 25 uses is the most commonly used 2-word phrase. So the characters in this are our 3-word phrase. The characters are obviously being terrorized quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, they're
when we get to our
salty language.
yeah, they're I think they're a younger bunch and not afraid of a bit of potty mouth. But the 4-word phrases, when we get to there, is the most common one, 9. It was really interesting because this
Interesting.
I do not have a translation of this yet, as far as the story goes, but this is a motif being used by the author. And whenever this voice starts to ring out and the narrator hears it, something's off. Something's going to happen. And scrolling through the where this showed up, because the one thing this kind of really does for us is shows you phrases that you're using repeatedly throughout, not only when they're close together, just in total. So this is used 9 times, and you can click and jump through. And this one, okay, this is the first time it shows up, and you think, whoa, that's that strange girl's voice. It's just kind of coming through the air in this place, but nothing's really happening. And then it happens again, and it's getting weirder. We're starting to feel that this is tied to something. Now, something that I really love to see when it comes to effect, and the stream is messing with me here, just clicking these, sorry. There's another one, that wasn't right. I'll scroll manually because the stream is messing with me. When you get to a point that you get to this, something is about to go down.
Yeah. And what I love about that is, because you've mentioned this in like phobia workshops in your class and stuff, is this really is getting at some base fears of somebody is saying something that maybe I should be able to understand and I can't, or things like that. This is a basic human reaction. When something that should be intelligible to you is not, it's very unnerving, right? Because it's not just nonsense. It does mean something, but you'll never be able to figure it out without context, So it's really troubling.
That's definitely true from a kind of human perspective built into the horror as well as what does that mean. And I think it works here, especially this is the appearance of the ghost, and I think it's just wonderful how Cassandra does this with this phrase first showing up. It's just a bit weird. It's a little off. The second time it's a bit weird, a little off, but we're starting to build a context around it that it's tied to something potentially dangerous. And each time it's showing up by itself, we're getting more imagery, more glimpses at the thing that is directly related to it, until it builds to the point where we have it 3 times quickly in a row and we know it's about to happen. That is, it's just so good. It's something I would recommend all the time when it comes to horror too, is finding that motif, something you can attach to the threat, building the perspective of that, or building the expectation around it, and then really playing with the reader, because that's the point where it's like, okay, here it is. Repetition starts to bring it to life, and it feels like something is just like running up behind you. There's no escape now. It is here, and it's just fantastic. And when we come to pacing, now, of course, actually, before we do move to pacing, one thing I would say as well is this is where this kind of report can be really helpful, because highlighting that, if this was the
Mm-hmm.
intent and you looked through and noticed that, oh, well, down here I've got it 3 times again, but this is not that kind of scare.
Right.
I'm overdoing it. I've deployed
Right.
it too many times.
Yeah.
So it would help you really, really find those kind of things. And you'll notice as I
Mm-hmm.
scroll through here, of course, this is probably another direct attack where we have 2 of it, of that phrase, but everywhere else, we're fine. There's very, very little use for it elsewhere. So using that to, quite frankly, excellent effect as far as Cassandra is concerned. Pacing, we have only 6.42% of paragraphs with slow pacing. Of course, 6.42% may seem a little high to some in terms of thrillers and everything as well, but this particular novella certainly has an essence of the gothic about it. It's the creepy old mansion with the Japanese ghost around it. So there's a lot of slow sort of elements there. But of course, that still doesn't overtake everything. We're not sitting here at like 20 or 30% slow pacing. And the pacing doesn't seem to be an issue, actually reading it insofar as I've read so far. So it's a pretty good result, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We can see here there's a good amount of variation going on.
Mm-hmm. I imagine some of those towards the end, it's specific descriptions of things that you need to linger on horrific elements. I'm guessing, but or
It likely
tension
is.
before the reveal, perhaps too.
Yes, because, for example, one kind of minor spoiler, I won't go into too much detail on it, but the kind of first appearance of the ghost is slow. It's not a
Right.
sudden sharp shock and run around screaming. No, it's a very slow description of the face, and as the thing kind of wraps its arms around the narrator from behind. And then she sees the face in the mirror and all of that. It's a slow description. It is not an explosion of terror. It's just super creepy. The way it's made super creepy is by how slow it is. Yet again, that stuff does not overtake the rest of the story. And I always just like to look at readability as well to see where we stand, regardless of genre. How things are being written these days is quite important, again, for accessibility, to make sure that most people can actually read it and understand it and not really struggle. Because you're going to lose a lot of readers if your writing's too dense, and people just can't really piece it together or parse it. And this one, flesh reading ease score, we like to look at 78. So we're getting towards that 80. Kind of like to see it at an 80 benchmark, more or less. Seems to be the most popular in commercial fiction, and 70 is not a big leap away from that. So this looks perfectly readable to me. Ooh, and finally, we'll get to our horror comparison.
I am
So
curious to see because it did so well. Like, is it even gonna move very much? That's a question.
it
Hmm.
always is a question when we get to the genre comparison as well, especially with things that are already very well edited.
Right.
Is this 86.54 to begin with? So if we're going for the horror genre, and especially being a brand new horror release,
Hmm.
what do we think?
Yeah, or does it even potentially even drop because it's maybe not as well representative of the genre? You just never know, right? Never know with a score like that. I can't imagine it's gonna shift too much. I'm gonna say it's gonna like very slightly move. It'll be like 87, but I'm just guessing. I do not know. What does everybody think out there?
Not too bad a guess. 82.
Eight-
I would think I'll go down a bit.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, let's kill the suspense.
All right. Oh, so close.
That's almost mirroring 86.86. Should have been 86.66. That would have been good for the horror element as
Right?
well. But 86.86, again, a little bump. So we're
Yeah.
86.54 and bumped up to 86.86. Yeah, it can be real tough when you're getting to that higher numbers, especially when you're threatening. Maybe the word threatening is not the right one to use, but almost breaching the 90 level to jump between genres. If you're almost at 90, say on general fiction, it can be real hard to push higher when you get to specific genres. Often that high, you'll start to go down a bit, which is why I think Diego was actually quite a good guess there, thinking it might drop slightly, because sometimes that can happen. If to a general standard you're edited to such things. So it's good to see a little bump up, is what I like to see when you are really confident. And I think through the reports that we've seen here, all the writing and certainly the amount of editing that's been done to this novella is incredibly confident. And comparing that, you want to get that little extra bump of confidence when you switch over to the genre that you're trying to work in. So a little extra jump is always a good thing to see. It just kind of confirms that it's a really well written piece, and also fits into its target area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For sure. But it does go to speak it does speak to, what works for writing often works across, right? It's not always so dramatic that you have to completely rethink your whole writing style.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the thing that I would probably rethink completely out of all of it would be the power words. If I'd
Right.
expected I had written a kind of heart pounding horror, and I came in here and everything was energetic and encouragement. Well,
Right.
I'd probably have written some kind of adventure
Mhm.
novel instead, and need to get more of the fear elements in there. But
Right.
so far, everything I've seen, certainly all the reports that we've run through here today and the portions I've read of this novella, it gets a very solid thumbs up from me for Halloween. I'd recommend picking it up.
Nice. Fantastic.
And that has been, see if we have any final questions from anyone viewing, but that has been Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw.
Definitely seems, like you said, very appropriate for this time of year, and looks like a really easy read. Nice, breezy read that packs a punch. So yeah, sounds exciting.
Yeah, I think for the length of it, a 21, 22K is about, I guess, approaching a third of your standard novel. So you might want to ideal kind of thing if you can consume something like that in an evening, just Halloween night, sit there with that in between handing out candy or whatever, and have some fun.
Yeah, there you go.
See Celissa asking there, no, I don't believe it is her first work. um, I'm not sure if it's her first directly published. This is published by Titan Books. It might be the first directly published through a straight publisher like that, and not as part of a magazine or anthology or anything like that. But I'm not 100% certain, so can't speak entirely to that.
Awesome. All right, well, Gareth. Well, thank you so much for going through all that. That was really interesting. We'll be back next week. You should be checking out our YouTube schedule, because we're going to be throwing in some events. Because there's a little event you may have heard of. It's called NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, and we will be providing a lot of programming to help you navigate that, including how to write more efficiently, how to motivate yourself, all that fun stuff. We're going to have a kickoff party. Lots coming your way. So stay tuned. If you haven't, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and check all of that fun stuff out coming to you next week. Anything
Awesome.
else we have for us, Gareth?
No, just going to say thank you everybody for coming. Have a great Halloween, and if you do pick up this novella, pay a close eye to how Cassandra frames that dialogue throughout. I think that's a really great example.
And that's a great writer tip. So thanks a lot, everybody.
See you later.